The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio. Want the real story behind the sound bites and headlines? Let's find the facts. Remember, it's not a conspiracy theory if it's the truth. You are not paranoid or confused. You just need to know.
And greetings, everybody. It is time for another edition of Need to Know. I'm Keefer, your host, and glad to be back with you as always. I greatly appreciate so many of you tuning in each week here on TKR to learn everything you need to know. And of course, now as we sit here and begin another week, now into the later parts of October, we are a couple of weeks removed from the event that really rocked the world and has changing a lot of the environment that we all live in, whether we acknowledge it or not. And, you know, of course, I'm talking about the events of October 7th, which I haven't really talked about in the last couple of editions of the show. Like a lot of other people, I think that results from a basic human element of almost denial that something so awful and so horrific can actually take place in the modern day world. I mean, we're hearkening back here in these kind of circumstances to things that happened in the ancient world where these marauders would come into communities and basically what they used to call sack the entire landscape, basically taking what they wanted, killing the occupants with absolutely no regard for their life or rights. And, you know, to think that in this modern day world, that kind of atrocity can still take place is extremely disturbing. And I think it's taken me a couple of weeks to really gain the perspective to discuss it a little bit. And the last thing I want to do on this program each week is to discuss negative, bring you down kind of subjects. But it's very important that you summon up your feelings and impressions when you're in a position where I can't just stick my head in the sand. I'll start off by saying I'm kind of amazed that so many people I interact with that, you know, will even be willing to discuss the events of October 7th in Israel at the hands of the Hamas marauders. So many people don't even want to discuss it or even acknowledge it and act like it's, well, and I think it emanates from there's nothing I can do about it anyway. It doesn't concern me, but it does concern you. And I think there's some perspectives that need to be shared today. And I'm going to do it in the most unemotional fashion, basically detaching myself from my personal feelings on this and just tell you some impressions and some things that you need to be aware of, that you need to know that are resulting from what happened. Of course, I don't really want to get into the news reports, although the ones that you get and I get are very distorted. But on the Saturday, October 7th, hundreds of Hamas invaders either parachuted into Israel or infiltrated into those areas of some border communities and systematically eliminated anybody in their path. These are just civilians. These are not government people. These were people living their lives on a weekend. And these invaders came in and murdered children, raped little girls, beheaded and burned the bodies of elderly people, just anybody again in their path, just like some kind of rabid rats came in to these communities and eliminated the lives and of just regular citizens living in subdivisions and settlements and different neighborhood structures. These were not military targets. These were regular civilians. And if that's not enough, they, by all reports, have also taken prisoner over 200 people, including still 10 Americans who happen to be visiting relatives or whatever, and were in the wrong place at the wrong time. That, that the act itself is so heinous and so over the top that the horrors of even imagining that, and I know no one wants to put themselves in that position to say, here I'm just conducting my life and people kick in my door and come in and murder my family and probably me while we watch this spectacle, helpless to do anything about it, because these people weren't armed. They weren't able to defend themselves. They were just people living their lives. These were not combatants. Their only crime was living in Israel and being predominantly of the Jewish faith. That's the crime they committed that led to their death sentence at the hands of these people. And let's talk about these people, because that's the first major distortion that is not being very well explained, and I think intentionally not explained. The Hamas movement. Who is Hamas? I've talked to a couple of people who actually thought that Hamas was some other kind of subdivision of Palestinian or Islamic. I'm trying to think of the right word here because I'm not scripting this. This is just coming from my heart and mind. But that they have identified Hamas basically as just some other part of the population of Islamic folks. That is not what Hamas is. Hamas is a movement. Hamas is an organized group that is a militant Islamic terrorist organization. It is recognized as a terrorist organization by the United States government and has been since the 1990s. Also, the European Union. This is not a political movement. This is a terrorist organization. Now, the reason that the line gets blurred there is because in 2007, Hamas, trying to become the force and throw out the Fatah party that was in rule of the Palestinian state for many years, headlined by the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, with Yasser Arafat. This more militant, more terroristic organization, Hamas, began to inject itself, I should say, into the political situation in Gaza and on the West Bank of Israel. And their agenda, their stated agenda, was the complete destruction of the Israeli state and the murdering of Jews. That was their political agenda. And they won a bunch of support from people in the Palestinian state to become a political force. And that wasn't enough for them, because a year later, paralleling very closely what happened in Nazi Germany in the late 1930s, won a few political victories, got a little bit of a foothold, and next thing you know, they made moves to seize complete power and control of that Palestinian state. So Hamas, since 2008, has been the absolute dominant force in Palestinian life in the province of Gaza. Hamas is a again, recognized terrorist organization who is almost completely funded by the most evil regime on the face of the earth, the Iranian structure. They are agents for Iran. They are not representatives that happen to have risen to power in Palestine. They seize power there, funded by and encouraged by and directed by the country of Iran, who is the greatest geopolitical enemy on the face of the earth for much of the civilized world because of their ancient belief system and their obsessive desire to impose their will on the rest of the world. So Hamas is who they are, and they have been responsible for numerous terrorist attacks all around the world, and particularly in Israel with suicide bombings and different military-style operations. But the one on October 7th took the cake because this was a coordinated, long-planned attack. This is an organization that has taken all the funding that's poured in from around the world, supposedly to help the Palestinian people who are living in squalor and depression in Gaza, because their ruling group, Hamas, has taken all that money, purchased weapons, built an illustrious almost 200 to 300 mile tunnel complex for keeping their operations secret while they gear up for this initiative to achieve their stated goal that I mentioned before, to completely eliminate Israel from the face of the earth and to murder anyone of the Jewish faith. That's their agenda. That's what they're there for. That's who Hamas is. Don't think that they're some other kind of political party or some sort of offshoot from Arabic origin. This is a terrorist organization funded by the mother of all activity around the world in terms of terrorism, ISIS, all of the fundamentalist, horrible acts of treachery around the world and murder, the Iranian controlling group. So Hamas comes in, does this terrible thing, murders almost 1,400 innocent Israeli families, children, elderly people, takes over 200 hostages for bargaining chips and human shields. And that's another thing to keep in mind here. These people don't care about the run-of-the-mill Palestinian people who are not affiliated with their movement. Not to say that these people are completely non-complicit for Hamas's presence, because, of course, the man on the street in Gaza, what the Biden administration is calling regular Palestinians, have been certainly sympathetic and supportive of Hamas efforts because of their hatred for Israel, because they think the Israelis are occupying the lands that belong rightfully to them. It's been a dispute that goes back in history to very much pretty much the time after Christ, when Christianity rose to prominence. The battle between the extreme Islamics and the Jewish faith in this part of the world has been going on for centuries and centuries and centuries. And it just continues to this day. So that's who Hamas is. That's how Hamas gained their foothold. Furthermore, a lot of people don't even understand how the state of Israel came to be. And I don't want to get into some long, extensive history lesson, so I'll just give you the basic highlights. As persecution of Jewish people in Europe became more and more prevalent right after World War I, and of course leading up to World War II, where the agenda of the German Nazi movement under Adolf Hitler was to eliminate Jewish people and purge them from their society, that anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish movement permeated through much of Europe, and basically people fled. Unfortunately, millions did not get away, were rounded up, and as we well know from history, put into concentration camps, death camps per se, and systematically eliminated. Well, there were millions that fled and got out of Europe and managed to return to the area of the world where the Jewish people emanated from to start with, which is down in this area of the Middle East. And in 1948, after World War II, sponsored predominantly by British influence and the United Nations, the Jewish state of Israel was formed, and it was an amalgam of people already settled in that area, a lot of Jews still there, but a lot of Arabic folks that had lived and coexisted, although not always peacefully. But the influx of millions of more people of the Jewish faith there caused immediate problems in the Middle East. And over the next 20 years, there were skirmishes and wars and territorial battles. But that's basically how it all came to pass. And in 1967, in a brief war with Egypt, the Israelis prevailed and took complete control of the Gaza Strip area that you keep hearing about. And the decision was made that Israel would go ahead and not occupy that territory. Their military and civilian population was removed into the conventional boundaries of what is now Israel. And that area was basically offered as the place that Palestinian people or people of Arabic origins that did not want to remain in Israel could occupy. And that is how we've gotten to the point where we are now. Of course, the story has gotten diluted to the situation that basically Israelis casted out numbers of Arabic people into Gaza and left them to their own devices. And, I really am not an expert on how many people went there willingly or felt like they needed to go there to try to establish the, quote, Palestinian state. But it has not been ever an orderly situation, and it has been permeated and infiltrated with major negative influences for many, many years. And again, this is not a program today to cast blame on who's responsible for the strife that's been going on for centuries and centuries in this part of the world. It's just a reality, but it's been exacerbated now by the introduction of these elements that will take any measures to eliminate the state of Israel. Okay, here's the other things in need to know now that you've got background. And again, I apologize to many that are saying, of course, this is knowledge I already have. But in talking to people that I know are well thought and well educated and seemingly sophisticated, a lot of people do not know these basic facts. So I'm assuming that I'm enlightening perhaps some that never have really taken the time to understand the conflict or what's going on. Here are the things that I'm particularly disturbed with, though, that affect you and I and everybody in our country. The initial attack was so horrifying that, yes, there was a lot of negative reaction right at first, but not of the variety that you would expect when 1,400 civilians are senselessly murdered. Because unbelievably, after what happened in the 1940s with World War II and the systematic elimination of Jews, the feelings of discourse and hatred for the Jewish people still permeates today, obviously, because there's still significant anti-Semitic feelings out there, and it's hard to understand after seeing what happened back in that era that those feelings linger, but somehow, some way, there's still tremendous resentment in a lot of quarters that you wouldn't expect of the Jewish people. And it rears its ugly head when there's very tepid reaction to the fact that the citizens murdered in these innocent people, and many babies and children and elderly people, and it just regular families. I can't reiterate that enough. When the victims of this, when it's shrugged off somehow because, well, they're Israelis and Jewish. They're human beings. They're people. I don't understand the indifference to the fact, and it can only be attributed to some kind of anti-Semitic feeling. So you've got a reaction in this country because just a couple of days later, when the Israelis wanted to step up and retaliate, which of course you're going to have the people that are responsible for this have got to pay a price. You can't have mass murder and just shrug and say, well, that's just the breaks of the game. So immediately there was shelling back and forth between, and it wasn't one way. It wasn't just Israel lashing out, but there was, of course, a report just a few days later of a Israeli bomb hitting a hospital, and the implication was that it was targeted in Gaza, that killed 500 people, and immediately it just sent sentiment. Anybody who was even feeling a little bit bad about what had happened there immediately had their feelings shifted to these cold-blooded Israelis now target innocent people and doctors and sick people in a hospital and blow up a hospital and kill 500 people. And the American media, the world media, ran with this story right away to kind of balance out the whole discussion and say, look at this horrifying reaction. Look what the Israelis have done. They've killed 500 innocent people in a hospital by targeting them with one of their missile strikes. But that information did not come from pictures or actual accounts or anybody's on the ground reporting. The information that the hospital had been bombed and 500 people had died, completely innocent people, doctors, patients, whatever, came from Hamas itself. Hamas reported and sent out through social media and whatever network of contacts they have, because, again, they're affiliated with major sponsors that are funding all of their efforts. That information came from Hamas, and without any regard for checking the source or making sure the information was accurate, every major media outlet in the world, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, the networks of NBC, CBS, ABC, CNN, everybody reporting the Israelis have struck a hospital and killed 500 Palestinian people. It turns out the report was completely bogus, and it is such an indictment of journalism in this day and age, who wants to get information and run stories that fit their agenda. And why that is the agenda of the conventional media, to propagate terrorism and to support this oppressor victim kind of story that the Palestinian people have every right to lash out with these kind of terrorist attacks because of the way they've been abused by the Israelis and all of the sentiment and sorrow for that particular group of people. That's the agenda that they want to support. So immediately, without any kind of verification, they just basically printed and reported for 2 days on straight propaganda that was absolutely false. It came out 48 hours later that, yes, there was a missile that struck in the area of the hospital, actually in an adjacent parking lot, and there had been fatalities, less than 30. There was no major damage to the hospital and no 500 casualties of patients and doctors took place. It was all BS. It was all propaganda to swing sentiment away back into the favor of these supposedly oppressed Palestinian people. And the Palestinian people, the man on the street, has no say in this matter because their lives are being controlled by the entity that seized power, once again, back to Hamas. But media around the world is so anxious to light this fuse, and boy, did it ever, because there were protests everywhere in the Arab world as a result of this. Millions of people were privy to the report of the supposed hospital atrocity, took to the streets in many different capitals, and even in our country, on college campuses, particularly the upper crust Ivy League campuses, NYU, different institutions. There were people in the streets at rallies, at pro-Palestinian rallies, railing against the Israelis' atrocious act of retribution. And it was all false. And it was all triggered by the fact that the media ran with a story to light the fuse and even out the outrage and put the impetus back on the Israelis, who were not responsible. And there is absolute solid proof that they were not, that this was a wayward missile launched from that side of the conflict. And maybe it was wayward, but I suggest that it's very possible that this strike near the hospital was a intentional act to create a story and create outrage. And boy, did it work. Because if you've got tons of students from the most distinguished, and I use that word with great derision, institutions in our country, Harvard and Ivy League schools and NYU and the like, you've got students in the street protesting the acts of the Israelis while not even acknowledging what happened the week before with the murder of 1,400 innocent people. That just tells you how warped things are and how the supposedly best and brightest students in our country are being totally brainwashed into believing that Israelis and Jews are the evil regime, the terrorists in the equation, which is absolute nonsense. So those things are very distressing. And I'll leave you with another one that's not being reported by media, but of these attackers that murder all these innocent citizens and children and babies. There's a really disturbing trend to this, is that they have been not only indoctrinated since birth, living in this absolute boiling pot of hate and rage, and they've been totally indoctrinated. Children's books are filled with images of Arabic fighters and militant Muslims killing Jews. Cartoons that children watch in that part of the world is about the same thing. So these individuals grow up completely programmed for this kind of terrible activity. And then they, not only that, it has come to light that the people deployed for these kind of missions that resulted in the massacre of so many citizens are so tranked up on these killer amphetamines, which are chemically induced to create, incredible stamina and ability to stay up for days at a time. and just promote rage and indifference and lack of empathy and hostility. That these are all drug-addled people, and this is not a new precedent. It's another parallel to Nazi Germany, because a lot of people don't realize that the Nazi stormtroopers who created so much havoc and destruction in the world the first couple of years of World War II were largely fueled by the earliest forms of crystal meth. So not only do you have people that are carrying out these nefarious activities, but they're so messed up on drugs and that completely take away their humanity and make them basically killer zombies who are capable of any atrocity and any horrifying situation. So just some extra elements that you're not hearing in the media, that you have to do your own research, and you have to go into a lot of different areas to learn the truth. But the fact that there's major demonstrations in our country that are anti-Israel, anti-Jewish faith, anti-Semitic by supposedly the elites, the best and brightest. If you're listening to this broadcast, it's about a 90% probability that you are smarter than any of these supposedly gifted people in Ivy League schools, because they clearly have no understanding of what's happening in the world. And anybody that has a shred of any common sense knows that their demonstrations and outrage is completely misguided and a product of being basically programmed and brainwashed. And isn't that a sad fact to consider? So, again, this was a subject that had to be talked about. I tried to present it in the most matter-of-fact way that I could, but I think it was things that you certainly need to be aware of if you are not already. And I hope that you've picked up some element or some seed of your own process to be able to foster more research and more thought, because people around the world need to recognize Iran, China, Russia, all have banded together. This is a latest threat to peace-loving people around the world who do not want to be controlled by these kind of ideologies. We are all in this fight now, and everybody better realize it before it's too late. I'm Kip Keefer. That's what I think you needed to know today. Again, I never want to be coming along with information that will bring you down or cause you any kind of personal strife. But there are things that everybody needs to understand, that we are not impartial observers. We are very much in the middle of this fray with our thoughts, our ideas, and our future reactions to how all this is going down, because this is the world in turmoil right now, and everybody's involved in that drama, unfortunately. Have a great week, everybody. Don't miss Keefer and Kurre. We will be talking about whatever's on our minds coming up this week. And, of course, every Saturday, the world of college football, a great escape for us all. We will be back with ABC 3340, 1030, the starting lineup, Keefer and Kurre. And we are looking forward, of course, to bringing you that program. Don't miss it. Have a good week, everybody. Food for thought that you needed to know. I'll talk to you next week.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.